Welcome to the Multiply podcast. I'm Carson Samson of Mennonite Brethren, Church of Manitoba.
I'm Sarah Braun with MB Mission.
And Karla Braun with the MB Herald.
Let's just jump right in. I was with part of my team the other day at the 4Cs, that's Canadian Council of Christian Charities Pursuit Conference. We were doing some professional development and had the pleasure of listening to the keynote speaker, Dr. Gordon Smith of Amherst University. He was talking about living as Christians in a pluralist and secular society and what does it mean to be the church here in 2017. He had 4 responses, and I won't go into detail, but the 4th response is the one that he was steering us towards. And he referenced James David Hunter's To Change the World, and he said that it was important we be a faithful presence within our community. And that sat with me for a while and piqued my interest, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about it. And as coincidence is, Karla came to me just a couple days afterwards with suggesting we talk to some folks who are doing just that, and they're engaged in intentional living within communities that may not be their own, at least not where they've come from, but a place where they feel called to be. And so today we're going to talk to 2 individuals who are involved in that. We'll be speaking to Jordan Duerrstein. He's the recipient of the Mennonite Brethren Historical Commission's Summer Archival Internship for 2017. But before that, we have a call-in interview with Jacob Chandler, who is on the vision team for MoveIn. Let's pick that up now.
Okay, so Jacob, thanks for joining us on the Multiply podcast here today. We're excited to get to hear from you and a little bit of your story. Welcome here.
Yeah, good to be here.
Thanks for joining us from Ontario, right? That's where you are right now?
Yeah, I'm in Toronto.
I'd love if you could tell our listeners and us just a little bit about the path that you've taken, the overarching storyline from, I believe you were at the University of Waterloo, you were with MB Mission for a time, which is where I work now, and now working with MoveIn. So I'd love to just hear a little bit of how you got from A to B to C.
Yeah, I gave my life over to Christ when I was about 16 at a summer camp where, God gave me the verse Isaiah 61:3, which shares about how we've been created as oaks of righteousness, planting of God's splendor. And it really touched me at the time where I was kind of in a season of really figuring out what my purpose is in life, and as a teenager, just figuring out what next steps are. I don't think it was until later that I really grasped the truth that making God's name known and showing His glory to others is really best shown through global mission, and how that really ended up being a big calling as I went through university, as I kind of continued to get to know God in my studies, and inevitably I got to learn about global mission through the MB church I was at. So I was at Glencairn MB Church in Kitchener, and that's where really the first time I got to hear from missionaries who were reporting, and even short-term teams that were reporting at our church, and hear about this idea of global mission and the opportunity to share about who God is to people around the world that may not have any opportunity to hear from Him. But then after I graduated, I felt a distinct tug to kind of try out global mission and just test it out. So right after graduating from University of Waterloo, taking engineering, I joined the MB Mission Action Program. And then right after that, I did Trek. So I was able to go to DR Congo, and then also to Portugal, and serve with some awesome people there and learn more about church planning, about cross-cultural mission. Then after that, I continued to get sucked in, and I did an internship with Trek in Abbotsford, BC. So at that point, I kind of resolved that engineering might not be my life calling, but I got more and more excited about what God has for people who are excited about global mission. Yeah, so that's when I eventually ended up coming back to Ontario after a couple of years of a whirlwind of different short-term mission opportunities. At that point, I was kind of coming back, and I was thinking, well, what does this look like going forward for me here in Ontario? I still have this passion for unreached people. I still have a lot of different gifts and skills that God has given me that may be useful in that. I'm not sure I want to dive right back into engineering necessarily.
Yeah.
That's actually right when I heard for the first time about MoveIn.
Tell us what MoveIn is, what the mission and purpose is, and what your role is with MoveIn.
Mm-hmm. So MoveIn is a movement of regular Christians who have decided to intentionally move into difficult neighborhoods in order to share Christ. Particularly, we move into neighborhoods that have high levels of unreached people groups and poverty.
Mm-hmm.
So the way it works is that we have different neighborhoods throughout Canada, is where a lot of our teams are, that we've designated to have a high level of unreached people groups. And in Canada, that you generally means immigrants or refugees who have traveled from nations that traditionally have little to no access to the gospel, or they don't have a believing church that's presently reproducing. So these people that are traditionally from restricted countries or countries that don't have a large gospel presence are immigrating to our cities here in Canada. And often, especially in Canada, there's often kind of pockets of landing areas for immigrants. Whether they're different ethnic groups that kind of pool together, or it may be that they group around different social services that the cities offer, or a number of different reasons. Also, just the immigrants tend to group up in just lower income areas where the rent is cheaper.
Right.
So that's kind of some of the background of what the neighborhoods are that we move into. And so what we do is we profile those areas, do a bit of research, and then the next step is that we invite teams to move into them. And this is where really the heart of MoveIn comes from the verse John 1:14, which says, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Or the Message translation that we rely on even more is that the Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. So that's kind of our heart verse that we look to. Yeah, we have 300 what we call MoveIn-ers, or people who are on the MoveIn team, 26 cities in 12 different countries. So a lot of our teams right now in Canada. Yeah, right now we have our teams are distributed through 12 countries.
Oh, cool.
So a lot of them are currently in Canada. Like that's where we have the most teams. But we have what I would call pioneering teams.
Yeah.
They're kind of just seeds of teams in a few other countries. So we have some teams in Europe. We also have some in Latin America. And we also have a couple pioneer teams in Indonesia and the Philippines.
Oh, very cool.
MoveIn is very distinct and even different from a lot of traditional mission organizations, where we intentionally call ourselves a movement. And the reason for that is because it's really built not on organization or on leadership, it's built primarily on the vision.
Right.
The way that the way that it grows is that when people catch the vision, which is to see regular Christians prayerfully moving in to the unreached urban poor, when people hear that and grasp it and decide to do it, then they can actually just go and do it.
Right.
There's nothing holding them back from just starting it. So from time to time, we actually hear about teams starting kind of after the fact, and we kind of only hear through the grapevine that they've actually begun.
Okay, yeah.
Taken the vision and run with it.
And so what's your role specifically with MoveIn?
Yeah, so of these 300 plus MoveIners, most of them are what we call tent makers, which means they are students, they have regular jobs. or whatever, but they have regular lives, and they call their mission field the home that they go back to it in the evenings or on the weekends. So they have regular work that they do, but then they engage with their neighborhood when they're at home.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few of us, including myself, who are on what we call the MoveIn Vision team.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a mobilization staff team of about 20 or so people. And our primary role is to spread the vision, to share in new regions, and also to support existing teams.
Okay.
So I'm one of those few MoveIners that also will call our full-time work supporting the movement and advancing it forward in new regions.
Okay. And how did you first get involved with MoveIn?
Yeah, I actually, so I mentioned I heard about it while I was still working with MB Mission out west. And at that point I was moving back to Ontario, and it was a pretty quick process where I just contacted one of these MoveIn Vision team staff members and said, hey, I'm interested. Let me know what the next step is. And she connected me with another guy who was interested around the same time. I talked to him on the phone for about half an hour and kind of got to know each other a bit. And then I flew home to Ontario, and within about 2 days of moving in, me and this other guy and a third guy just met together in a Tim Hortons for the first time. And then 2 days later we moved in together.
Wow.
So yeah, and actually it sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. Throwing a bunch of random strangers together who knows if we would have gotten along, but we ended up really thriving as a team, as housemates. And I think it's primarily because we were all following the same vision, and we had a lot of unity in what God was individually calling us to, and what we had felt God placed on our heart as a team. So yeah, me and two other guys were living in an apartment complex in Kitchener on Westmount Road on the west side of the city. And yeah, that's where we got to just gradually get to know some neighbors. After we had got to know some, we started doing every Thursday night we would go out and play soccer with kids and get to know families gradually through just weekly hanging out with them and playing some pickup soccer and playing games. Over time we got to do some events, like we had a barbecue. We had some people over regularly for meals. So yeah, it was a really good time of just kind of gradually learning what this move-in life is like, where it's not overly programmatic, where we have set times or events or whatnot, but it's more about getting to know neighbors and getting to know people relationally, and even just getting to know people in the hallway over time, over a couple of years. It's definitely kind of jumping into the deep end in some ways. First of all, like the first day we moved in, it was a bit terrifying because there's like spray paint on the walls, and there's like the fluorescent lights are flickering, and there's a leak, and there's like water flowing from the ceiling. And when I first moved in there, I'm like, oh, I'm probably gonna die here within a month. That's the feeling I got. Right? Then within probably about 2 weeks, I realized, oh, this is just like a normal place where people live. It's like in an apartment, and I quickly felt totally safe there. And whenever you do something for the first time, there's always a bit of a honeymoon stage where you're just real excited and geared up, and you're kind of like trying to talk to lots of people and try new things. But I found that over time, like you gradually get into the normal rhythms of life. You get busy. You get into like regular events at church or with friends, and I quickly, within like a month or two, I realized I'm actually losing sight of the main reason why I moved here. And that's where I really came to terms with the fact that I need to be disciplined, and I need to have a much higher degree of discipline to intentionally walk around outside my apartment. One thing that I often tell new MoveIners that are just starting out is that the best place to meet neighbors is outside of your home, which is obviously a silly statement because you're not going to meet anyone sitting on their couch in your own living room, but it is very real, right? Like we spend a lot of our time in our own homes, and if you want to meet a neighbor, you actually need to intentionally walk outside your door.
Yeah.
So even though we intentionally choose to live in places where there's people from all over the world, people who have a lot of need, and also a lot of people who are very open to relationship, it still requires, even if we live like literally across the hall from them or down the hall, it still requires discipline. It requires intentionality.
I have a lot of conversations with peers and friends about, okay, what does it mean to be a good neighbor in Winnipeg? What does it mean to love the people around us when it's so easy to, like you said, be isolated and just be in our own homes and not meet anyone? The place where I live, there's 5 suites in an old house that's subdivided now, and we didn't meet anyone until 4 or 5 months after we moved in, when we just knocked on everybody's doors to say hi. It's much more easy to be isolated in your home. I guess kind of a 2-part question. To somebody who is interested in pursuing, like, knowing and loving their neighbors for the cause of Christ, but who maybe isn't sure about the actually moving from the neighborhood that they're currently in to a high-density, low-income area, what would you say to someone who's kind of exploring that and in that place? And then secondly, like in Winnipeg, there's currently no move-in communities, if I'm right on that. And so what would be a way that people here can get involved?
Absolutely. How to be a good neighbor, but also how to intentionally share Christ and how to be a good Christian neighbor. That's a great question. I think that one advantage a lot of us in move-in neighborhoods have is that because we're interacting with a lot of Southeast Asians, a lot of South Asians, a lot of people of Eastern cultures, like they are generally people who are much more open to just jumping into conversation. They're a lot more hospitable in general compared to a lot of us in the West. Like I grew up in suburbia where it was very strange for me to interact with any of the neighbors on my street.
Right.
And that's kind of what I grew up as normal. So now that I'm living in a place where there's a lot of people from warmer cultures, like I'm really realizing that a lot of these people are very open to engaging with neighbors. So I just want to put it out there that that's kind of almost an advantage we have. That for those of you who live in either suburbs or places where it's just less dense, it's almost in some ways much more difficult to engage with neighbors just because there's not that culture of openness and there's not that culture of hospitality. So I actually don't have an amazing answer for how to cross those barriers. That's actually a really big challenge. But there are ways, and there are things you can do. But definitely one thing that I think that we've learned, especially even recently as a movement, as we've been growing towards one strategy called disciple-making movements, is really having scripture ready, and having, not necessarily like memorizing a chunk of scripture so that you can quote it to someone, but having a Bible story ready to share. And that's something that can be really profound as you're able to have a conversation with people. Obviously, getting into conversation is the first step, but as you have conversation, as you are starting to build relationships with people, whether that's through helping them with things they need, whether that's sharing resources, whether that's just engaging in community events. But as you get into relationship, I think it's really important that we have stories about Jesus ready to share with our neighbors. And I think one thing that I've learned it in MoveIn as well, is that you don't always need to kind of build a program or build an event or build something from scratch, or even like fabricate something so that you can engage with neighbors. But actually look for what already exists in the community. From time to time, we do things like we have a really good kids camp program with MoveIn that we've partnered with that has programming that is really well geared towards Muslim populations. So we do things like that, where we build a camp program around the needs of our neighborhood. But by and large, there's often a lot of opportunities to be part of community art programs, or get to know what's going on in your community recreation center, or even just talk to neighbors about what they do in their spare time, and just kind of get to know what your neighbors do and where they bump into each other. So rather than trying to build your own thing, don't be afraid to see what's already there, and then you as a Christian who's one with Jesus is able to go into those structures, those events, those groups, and bring Christ into conversation.
Yeah. Lord willing, our prayer is that that someone who is listening to this podcast would be caught or interested in this vision that MoveIn has. And if somebody is and they want to follow up, what do they do next?
Yeah, the quickest way is to head over to our website, which is movein.to, as in I'm moving into
I see.
XYZ. So movein.to is our website, and there you can learn a bit about our deeper values and what our purpose statement is, and some of those things. But ultimately, you can contact us through our web form or email, and then we'll get back to you right away and set up a call to talk more.
And one more last thing, the Prayer Journey fundraiser.
Yeah, so the Prayer Journey, we're just entering into our third year for this annual fundraiser and prayer event. It's a multi-site event where we have over 20 locations. It's global. We have locations this year in Paris, Guinea, Jakarta, Manila, all over. And essentially what we hope to accomplish with the Prayer Journey is be able to pray through neighborhoods where there's unreached poor people, where we don't yet have teams. So we intentionally are praying through neighborhoods that don't have MoveIn teams in the hopes that people will be inspired to move in hopes that God will stir up the church to move in among their unreached poor. And also there's a fundraising component for people who choose to support our special projects that we're working on for the coming year. So you can check that out on our website, movein.to, and also prayerjourney.global.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for your time today. Blessings to you guys as you prepare for the prayer journey and just living life day to day.
Okay, we have Jordan Duerrstein.
Duerrstein, you got it.
There we go. With us. He's the archival intern for this year. Jordan is the recipient of Mennonite Brethren Historical Commission's Summer Archival Internship for 2017. This is from one of these great articles from the MB Herald website. He spends 5 weeks visiting each of the Mennonite Brethren archival centers in North America, but now there's only 4 of them, and there's 5 weeks. So you get to spend 2 weeks in Winnipeg.
Absolutely, which is wonderful.
Which is pretty exciting.
In May, at the end of May, which is better than 2 weeks in Winnipeg, I think, in November or something.
It's excellent timing, yes. It's far enough in May that spring has fully arrived and it's actually pleasant to be here. So good call on the timing. And you get to cap off those 2 weeks with the with the meetings, the annual meetings.
With the Mennonite Brethren Historical Commission's annual meetings.
All right, so that will no doubt be an exciting time. So, as an archival intern, your job is to research something.
Yeah, so the way that I got into this was actually I was doing research for a different course in seminary, and I was like, I needed some Mennonite Brethren resources, and then I came across this ad, Mennonite Brethren Historical Commission Summer Archival Intern. I was like, that's a long name, but this looks really cool. And so I put together an application and got in. And so I submitted as part of the application research interests. So I said, I'm in pastoral ministry, and this is kind of what I'm at, but I am also interested in MB history because I think that history is important and should be informing.
History's important.
History's important. Could you imagine that?
Tell us more.
For informing the future direction of our church and churches, to know where our conference has been and gone, what is going to shape us moving forward. It's really important. So that was part of my questions. I asked about communal life, because as you already had Jacob Chandler on the show earlier today, and I was on a MoveIn team for 3 years in St. Jamestown in downtown Toronto, 2 years as a single guy, and then Danielle and I were married and we stayed on the team. And so I was interested, what does early communal MB life look like? Because, we lived in villages in Russia, and then we came here and things changed. And so, I was interested in that communal life. And so I submitted that as part of my research interests and pastoral stuff. And sure enough, I got picked. But your next question was, what's actually happening for this archival internship? So I also get to do just archival work. So there's been a whole, I think I'm the 5th or 6th iteration of this summer archival intern, and 2 people have actually gone into archival work or doing master's or doctoral programs. I'm not sure if you know who they are.
Liz from last year is working for the MC Archives, or at least she was for a while working with the MC Mennonite Church Archives in Goshen in the U.S.
Nice.
And yes, Amanda Bartle, who was the first or second.
Yeah, she was early.
She also continued her studies in that field. She was quite early in her studies when she started.
And then there was a Japanese guy who came, you know his name, right?
Yoshio Fuji was his name.
Yeah, and he was studying at Fresno at the seminary.
Yes.
And then they were like, oh, this is great because now he's back in Japan, but he got all this exposure to...
and he was really pursuing the peace question, which hasn't really been part of the Japan Mennonite Brethren Church's background. They're the missionaries who were there, and so the kind of ethos of the church that was planted there was fairly evangelical focused, and so he was kind of rediscovering some of the richness of Anabaptism, particularly the peace tradition. And I think it's been quite exciting for him to go back home and bring that knowledge.
Absolutely. So it's cool to have this diverse group of people come in and see the archives, and I think that's what the impetus was. It's not just we want people interested in archives doing this. We want all kinds of people across the spectrum of the MB world. So whether that's pastoral or missionary or archive aimed people to come in here and do this. So I get to do at least half a day's work, no more. They don't want me doing more than half a day's work of digitizing materials or labeling and filing.
Being an archive gopher.
And being an archive gopher. And so all the archives are a little bit different. They all have their own unique character, and so you do different things in different places. And I like it. I did work in a library for a year. Actually, this is really funny. I did framing one summer, and my boss was like, "What job did you do before this?" It's like, I worked at a library. So he just laughed at me. He was like, "How are you supposed to be a framer?" But yeah, so I've done a little bit of library work, and so this was it interests me, books and history.
Yeah, this is all about how history, like you said, history can inform or give us insights into life today. So Carson was talking about the notion of faithful presence, and as we're looking at MB history and communal living, it strikes me there are sort of 2 takes as Anabaptists that we have to that. On the one hand, faithful presence absolutely is the Anabaptist ethos. We live our faith through our actions, and discipleship is lived out. So absolutely, it's about presence. It's about the old joke of the Mennonite who's asked if he's a Christian. He says, "I don't know. Ask my neighbor. How does he view me? Does he view me as a Christian?" On the other hand, we also have a not undeserved stereotype of Mennonites as separate from the world and
Still in the
creating
land.
the quiet in the land. The Amish not wanting to engage with, there's that word, not wanting to engage with the wider populace. So what did you discover about Mennonite Brethren? How we have been faithful presence, maybe in good ways and maybe in bad ways? Or is there a bad way to be a faithful presence? Maybe not.
Yeah.
What has Mennonite Brethren communal life looked like?
My research has shifted, and it's hard because I don't read German well, let alone read it that much. And so I was really interested in looking at early stuff initially, and thankfully some stuff has been translated because I started in California. So there was a magazine that actually Dora Dueck did a thesis on, and the old magazine was called the Ziensbote, and it was done in a printing press in the shack beside someone's house in Oklahoma, and then it moved to Hillsboro. But this was like a magazine that collected people's stories and articles as they traveled from Russia and into other parts of North America, and so it kind of held, and they shipped it all back to Russia too, to tell this story of how things are going. So it includes so many personal stories, but I really wasn't able to get into it, sadly. So my research, I was interested in the shape of the pastorate, and so then I was like, okay, how does the leaders of these communities shape the community? And then I kept kind of finding nuggets and puzzle pieces and moving from place to place, and I actually spent some time with Dalton Reimer, who was a former academic dean of Fresno. And I kind of, this conversation around community and me living in intentional communities kind of moved into this conversation describing the, quote, entrepreneurial spirit of the Mennonite Brethren, which totally goes along with what you were saying about being faithful presence and being totally, removed or not engaging with society. And so we have this paradox that we see where MBs can be very entrepreneurial and doing new things and exploding in one direction, and then also being very closed and not necessarily self-centered but center focused, and what are the boundaries, and let's not break the boundaries. Don't go to those dances or those movie theaters. Heaven forbid, what could that lead to?
Or dancing.
Yeah, no dancing. That's a big no-no. But so that there's a whole lot of ways in which MBs do this, and I found more and more as I went on. But in the research, what I found was shocking. The first thing I came across was Reedley MB Church. Now,
which is in California.
Which is in California. It's near Fresno. See, I grew up in Southern Ontario, and in Fairview Louth MB, which became Southridge. But then I also went to Scott Street MB, and those are both home churches for me, which are, Southridge is definitely bursting the bubble on one end, on the doing totally new, what you call radical stuff for an MB church, and then Scott Street, which is a significantly more traditional. And both those places are my home, so I'm actually have lived this tension and pull. Paradox, as one might say. But so Reedley MB in 1952 built a 2,000 seat auditorium as their sanctuary, and it looked nothing like a church in 1952.
Wow.
And we think, it's got to be this post Willow Creek, we're going to mini mega church trying to be cool. Our church is in BC or here in Manitoba, and Southridge is kind of 1,000+ people on a Sunday. But this was 1952, and this is a Mennonite Brethren church in Southern California, and I was like, what? How this is so totally breaking from the mold. This isn't the rural box church that's simple and straightforward. And I was like, well, this is cool. And Kevin Rempel does a lot of cool stuff on church architecture, and that's one of his, and I think there should hopefully...
And he's with the archives.
Yeah, he's the archivist. Actually, he's the head librarian at Fresno Pacific University now, but he was the archivist there for many, many years, and is now the archivist there. But I think he should be having a book coming out on Mennonite Brethren church architecture.
we will watch for that
Yeah.
and get a review of that. in the
So
Herald.
exactly, get excited for that. And other places, I go to Hillsborough, and then I'm kind of, other than just church architecture and buildings and growth and how's that bursting the bubble, intentional communities and stuff like MoveIn that I was a part of, which was actually initially co-sponsored by the Ontario MB Church. They actually sank some money into into MoveIn, which was really cool at the initial start of the movement in 2008, 2009. There's a church called Watershed in Kansas City, Missouri. I don't know if you've talked to them on the show, but these guys, they only have what we call a normal church service once a month. And everything else they do is their villages, they call them. And these are very, intentional communities they meet weekly and they're in homes, and it's a very organic thing. But this is the MB Church in the southern district of the U.S., right? And that's not what we expect. I mean, we can stereotype people and say that, we expect the southern county to be, or southern district in the U.S. to be more conservative. Hillsborough was basically a dry town for many, many, many years. They finally got a liquor store about 4 years ago. But yeah, so this is totally breaking the mold. And then another huge category is literal entrepreneurs. These are people that make lots of money from their business ventures, and they have a huge sway over missions and all kinds of things.
So here in Manitoba, we're familiar with Art to Fair.
Yeah.
Do you have any other names for us here?
Well, there was I think it was Abe Craker who was in Winkler, right?
Potato
and that's just like a huge thing.
Yeah.
And so when I was in Abbotsford, I finally stumbled across the work of Cal Redekop, and he had written a significant academic volume, and then a much more I don't like the word accessible, but very readable. It was an edited volume, people who submitted stories about these types of people. And then there is the Redekops in Abbotsford themselves. It's different Redekops, but and every church has these people. I think about Scott Street MB back at home, and Rudy Sawatsky's a guy who has been a huge part of Elmwood Kitchens, and dozens of people from the church are employed there, and hundreds of people from St. Catherine's are employed there. So it's just they are these business people, likely in every single church that that sit on church councils or church boards or committees, and they have a certain amount of wealth behind them, but they're also very God-fearing, very concerned about where the Spirit is leading the church, and they don't want that to affect too much. And so, they think that they don't have enough voice sometimes, and other people in the church think they have, too much of a voice because they, they're I don't know. I don't think fear, but they think that maybe there's too much weight behind their voice or something just because of wealth. But these are important people.
So faithful community can look like more than a bunch of pious young people having prayer meetings and living in a group home.
Absolutely. And it's so important for us to not ignore any of these aspects. And you can have churches that embody all of these things. You can have churches that have these intentional communities that are totally poverty focused or marginalized person focused endeavors. And I think about Southridge, another one of my home churches. They have a homeless shelter at their church. They do have wealthy business people as part of their congregation, and they have a large church building, right? So it's kind of, I haven't actually put those three things together until right now. But it's but it's
Epiphany on the podcast.
Epiphany on the podcast. It's great. So they're totally embodying this, and I can be critical about this too, and say that usually a lot of these larger churches, kind of take a step back from the conference in certain ways. And I think that they could be leaders of the conference, and they could have a stronger voice and could be larger participants in the conference. And this is a podcast, so I don't know how many listeners we have. If this goes, if you hear Jordan Duerrstein, critiquing these churches, but I, it's important for us to think and talk about these things actively, and I hope that the work I put together is worth reading. I feel like I'm barely just scratching at the surface, because I get a week of these archives and I don't even know it's there for the most part, and then I just show up and I kind of figure out, and then I move on. So I don't know how in-depth my stuff is, and Peggy Gertson, who is the archivist in Hillsborough, she said, don't worry about it. Just, you don't have to go crazy, because I was just going to go crazy in depth on just the intentional community part. And she's like, if you're seeing these things, just just write a little bit about each of these things, because what I'm doing here in the archives, John and the team here, they're just happy for people to be a part of the archives and recognize the value, because they're valuable, and they are. And as I said before, history is important, and we need to be able to look back to go forward with intelligence, but also to see how the Spirit has moved and worked among our churches, and when churches have failed. Like, it's important to have the church documents and church plants and things that have totally fizzled and died, just as much as it is to celebrate the growth of churches and to have their records too. So churches, please send your records into the archives for researchers and people that so we can have a good understanding of our church conference Canada-wide, whether you send them to Abbotsford or send them here to Winnipeg or in the States to Fresno or Hillsborough. I just think it's so important.
And what I'm hearing you saying is that through studying history, this is not about just backwards looking or navel gazing, that it's really often a way we can find insights for what we're doing today.
Yeah.
And sometimes can be a way to offer constructive critiques to what we're doing today. It's a bit easier to point out mistakes we've made in the past and then organically realize, there are applications in what we're experiencing today. It's not quite as close then, and we can come maybe to our own epiphanies about the insights that we're finding, rather than having to look at ourselves and critique ourselves. We can look at history and critique that and take lessons forward.
And I think it's a little bit scary for some people, because some of the church records I came across, and they said, no, you can't look at these because you don't have permission from the church. So there's a certain amount of privacy because these people are still alive. And a lot of these archives, some of the documents have very personal information. So it was cool to read through the really, really old Readley MB stuff that's been translated, because that's from 1906 moving forward. And it was all in handwritten German. And Otto, I don't know his last name. He did all this translating. He probably spent years translating these early documents into English. Thank you so much. And it was cool, but there's very personal things. Church looked very different. You had brotherhood meetings and business meetings, which are kind of the same thing, and people would just openly confess their sins and wrongs that they had done in front of the whole community, and it's documented in the church minutes.
Wow.
So I get to read through that, and you read about affairs, and you read about other, the teenagers who drank too much at the meeting and they felt badly about this, but other very personal things. And for people to read through this, if people are like, but this is someone's grandma or great grandma, and then you move through church history. So it's like, if we're going to go back and look at, let's say a church split, and we're going to look at the documents from 10, 15 years ago, and we're going to read about those minutes. These are both sensitive things. So I don't know how that works and that functions, looking back to look forward. But we have to be open about this. And if we are going to be, a brotherhood, and, we can talk about gendered language, but that's the word we're stuck with right now, because we don't have the German word, which, Geschwister, I think it just means brothers and sisters. And we're not going to call ourselves, the Mennonite siblings, or the Mennonite Brethren. That's what we're stuck with right now. But I think it's, what's that? Gemeinde? Gemeinde? Is that all it is?
I'm not sure.
We need the more wiser, older people in this room to help me, and I'm so embarrassed that
I know our German conferences are called Brudergemeinde.
Brudergemeinde.
So, but that's brotherhood, sort of brother congregation. Gemeinde is like congregation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you have a background in education.
Yes.
And in music.
Yes.
And now you're doing an MDiv. And just make it French.
Yes, the French of the MD.
And have been serving as a pastoral intern.
Yes.
At Free Church Toronto.
Church Toronto.
Which is newly
minted.
Mennonite Brethren in Ontario as well.
It is, and it's a really cool church in downtown Toronto. They're both in Kensington Market and in the Annex, which are two neighborhoods that aren't very far apart. And it's not like it's a church with two locations because they needed to expand or because there were so many people. It was because they wanted to be intentionally in different communities and
community-based
and very community-based, walkable, bikeable, TTCable if that's too far. But that's
no big parking lots.
No big parking lots. The Annex theater where we meet on Sunday mornings has about 8 parking spots. There's street parking, I guess, if you need it too. But I know very few people that drive to church. But even John Osmond, our lead pastor, he bikes, which is great. I'm so happy to have worked with a lead pastor who bikes to our staff meetings, and we bike a lot. It's pretty fun. But anyways, Free Church Toronto started a while ago. If you aren't familiar with the history of the church, they started about 2001 as this Pentecostal church plant that dreamed to be a mega arts church in downtown. And that changed, obviously. Lots of leadership change happened over time, and it became, they left the POC to be independent. And John Osmond was just attending the church. He was doing some incarnational community stuff through the Ontario MBs under, I think it was with Terry Wiseman and that church extension time. And then they were looking to not just be in Kensington, but be in Annex. And so John kind of took on an associate role part-time while being a chaplain, because that's what he was doing for work. And then he's now the lead pastor of this church, and they were looking to join, because it's not good to be an independent church for the most part, because it's, you're accountable to and all these sorts of things, and it's good to be part of a sisterhood of churches. And so John was like, the MBs kind of fit with us, and the church was also more than happy to explore. It's not often that churches go denomination shopping. Right? Like, we talk about church shopping and stuff, but I don't think there was much shopping happening. There might have been considerations, but it just fit. And I think the MBs have trying to, be in Toronto for many, many years. And there are churches on the more on the outsides of the city, but nothing in the core of Toronto, south of Bloor, and close to the lake and near all the big towers. But yeah, so it's really, really cool that to have worked there this past year, and by work I mean volunteer. Although thankfully I did get paid when I preached. You get the stipend. That's what they call stipend. Something honorarium. Something showed up in my bank account. And so I preached kind of once a month, and I helped lead worship, and I was involved with their small groups, their community groups, and discipleship groups they call them. And it was really cool to see that church grow in its own element, and to have its own unique characteristics, and it's certainly not ethnically Mennonite. That's certainly not the case. Although there are some, they've made their way. They were already in Toronto, actually.
Mennonites are everywhere.
They are.
So if you put a Mennonite church somewhere, the Mennonites will find you.
Yes.
Even if it doesn't look Mennonite.
Yes, they will. And so it was really a blessing to be a part of that community for that year for my placement. So you mentioned I'm doing my seminary or MDiv studies, and that's at Wycliffe College at the University of Toronto, which is Evangelical Anglican. So figure that out, right?
And MBBS, I do believe, is looking at doing some partnerships with them. Andrew Dick is doing an intensive course in St. I think he's doing it in St. Catherine's
at Southridge. I actually saw the advertisement for it.
But I think that's connected with Wycliffe College as well.
It might be. So for sure, Tyndale.
Yes.
And then for
Tyndale.
sure Tyndale.
Yeah, I'm conflating Tyndale and Wycliffe. That's my problem.
Yeah, because they're both in Toronto. They're both excellent seminaries.
Okay, I've got the wrong name.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. And it's a great spot. Like, I'm so happy to be studying at Wycliffe. There's about half the students are Anglican, and then another half are, at least in the MDiv stream, are from I've got Baptist friends and Alliance friends and Pentecostal friends, and so it's a really cool place to be, and they're happy to have me, an Anabaptist, studying among them.
Well, that's great. I'm hearing faithful presence, and I'm hearing these themes of entrepreneurship just cropping up in your story all over the place.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing it with us, Jordan.
Oh, my pleasure.
We wish you all the best in your next week and a bit.
Yeah.
Final week of being in the archives.
Final week.
Wrapping up with that highly exciting Historical Commission annual summit or annual board meeting, whatever it's called.
I'm excited.
So all the best, and all the best as you continue your studies. And
thank you.
Maybe someday we'll be doing a transitions announcement for you in the MB Herald.
That would be great.
To wrap things up, as we typically will, we'll give an update on where we're at. For those of you who are listening, it's probably come and gone already, but we're in the throes of Pastors Retreat. That starts on this Sunday, and we'll be just engaging with pastors, and we'll have time of praise and worship. There'll be some games. What's up at MB Mission?
Well, we just had our Trek program start 2 weeks ago, which is a 10-month program for really anyone of any age who's finished a post-secondary degree who is considering and discerning a call to long-term mission or vocational ministry. So we have, I think, 10 participants this year who are doing an 8-week orientation right now. And so they are doing discipleship and spiritual formation and team building before going on a 6-month assignment.
And where might they end up for the 6-month assignment?
This year we have one woman. This year we have one woman going to Panama, and we have 2 women going to Turkey. One couple is going to be going to their hometown of Saskatoon to do their assignment. And there's somewhere else that I'm forgetting. And then there's a few local assignments as well. Yeah, so that is starting. And then our action program, which is our 6-week summer program for young adults, it's typically for like 18 to 26-year-olds or so, is happening end of June. So we are getting ready for that and
ramped
up. I'm working on handbooks right now.
That's pretty exciting. There's nothing more exciting than working on handbooks.
Yeah, it's a lot of research. I get to learn some things. I'm working on a handbook right now for Shamattawa in northern Manitoba, where we're sending a team for 2 weeks this summer.
Cool.
So I'm on the research train right now.
Karla, rumor has it production starts today, tomorrow?
Starts today, yes. We're starting a little bit early because we have a retreat next week, which will cut into our time. So we're working on an exciting issue of the Herald for July, August, which will be full of wonderful articles. And you will look forward to reading it when it reaches your mailbox in July. I would like, however, to highlight something else, which is our website. And I think it's a little known fact that content goes up on the website that does not always make it in print. So if you were to visit the website on any given day, you might find something new that you haven't seen before, such as news from our schools about their graduations, exciting releases from MCC about the really amazing relief and development work they do around the world, and book reviews. We're trying to ramp up book reviews. They're short question and answer style, and we try to get one up every Monday. Sometimes I don't quite make that goal, but
it's a lot of book reviews. Yeah,
keep visiting the Herald website on Mondays or anytime, and find new things and learn about how people that the MB Church is connected to are doing things.
The Multiply podcast is brought to you by MBCM, Mennonite Brethren, Church of Manitoba, MB Mission, and MB Herald. Thanks for listening.
You fill my ears with melodies as the sun breaks the night. The sun breaks the night. You fill my eyes with wonder and awe, enraptured by your love.